get started. Thanks for your patience. Today we have a special presentation. This is the 22nd Energy Impact Team meeting. I'm Tom, 2030 District Program Manager, for those of you who don't know me. Quickly, I'm gonna toss it over to Daniel Lessing, the Energy Impact Team Chair, to provide a brief introduction to the team and some of the activities we have going on, and then we'll quickly run through our agenda before passing it over to our guest speakers.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And additionally, thanks for all the people that are joining that are not Energy Impact Team regulars. The Energy Impact Team is essentially set up to help the 2030 district and its members achieve their energy reduction goals. So as well as, the other part of that is shifting to renewables. So it's kind of a two-pronged attack. Right, so developing programs, so things like the walkthrough, that is an option for folks that are building members. We're performing kind of pro bono energy walkthroughs of our partners' buildings, finding funding opportunities like inviting the OEC to come have a conversation about what opportunities are that we see within the state as well as from a federal standpoint. And educational programming. So last year, the EIT sponsored and put on several educational programs to support the 2030 district. So we're going to continue pushing forward on those in the year 2022.
Awesome, thanks, Daniel. So quickly, we'll before handing it over to the OEC, we'll run through our abridged agenda. Provide a brief programmatic update. For those of you who were on the last call in December, we teased at the release of the 2020 report. So we'll quickly go over the high-level details of our 2020 report, and then do a quick programmatic update and events update, and then toss it over to our friends at OEC to provide an introduction. Very quickly, this is sort of some background information about the reporting years. So this is our reporting percentages. The Q4 2020 is for the 2019 report. Q4 2021 is for the 2021 report. So we had about a 2 million square foot increase between 19 and 20. Our reporting percentage ticked down slightly, but we did have an increase in actual square footage as well that was included into our report. And so we're pleased about that progress, staying above 70% reporting energy data to the district. Our report itself incorporated about 60% of the total square footage of the district that falls within our geographic boundaries. So that's not as high as would be ideal, but is still pretty high, especially when compared to other districts. So we're pleased by the progress that the district has made and our ability to have created and generated reports in our first 2 years of existence. We're the first 2030 district to do that. So we're certainly pleased by the capacity, and certainly thank the members and partners and our sponsors and financial supporters for being able to put us in a position to do that. So for those who have not seen our district report, this is a brief overview. The district experienced a 30.4% reduction in 2020. That's compared to a 21% reduction in 2019. Our offices saw a 28.6% reduction, which is down, which is a slight improvement over the 27% reduction that we saw in 2019. So obviously the onset of the pandemic and different operational strategies within buildings had a huge impact on the reports. We still are increasing the square footage of the district. So certainly as we continue to grow, we'll likely see fluctuations within the data, but we do think that this represents pretty solid progress for the first 2 years of reporting, and would anticipate the growing trends towards different work arrangements that we would expect to capture some of these gains moving forward. So there's more detail about our methodologies explained in the report. In 2020, we also did a preliminary look at our water data based on portfolio manager baselines. So this is the baseline reported, which is an aggregation of the earliest reporting date that we received from building members, was a water use intensity of 24.6. So there was a noticeable decrease between the baseline in 2019 and a slightly less noticeable decrease between 2019 and 2020. Though I will say that 2020, we had more buildings reporting water data, so that's likely to have impacted the overall results of the water. We still have not established a district baseline, but anticipate that that's an ongoing project in collaboration with Waterworks. Once we have that baseline, I think we'll be able to have a better sense of where the district members lie in terms of their water reporting. Lastly, quickly overview a few upcoming programmatic things. We did receive a request from GBBN to do a walkthrough of their building. Thanks to Amanda and Matt Meyer for stepping up to help out with that. That's scheduled for January 20th. That'll be our 4th official building walkthrough. We are postponing the in-person New Year kickoff event until February in consideration of Omicron spread throughout the community. And then lastly, we have, thanks to those members of the Energy Impact team who have volunteered to participate in our quarterly meeting planning. Daniel and I will be sending a separate outreach to you all to identify some next steps for that meeting. Okay, great. And so without further ado, I'd like to cede the floor to introduce Kylie Johnson, Southwest Ohio Regional Director with the Ohio Environmental Council, and her colleague Nolan Rutschilling, a West Side native who's the Interim Managing Director of Energy Policy. They're going to provide a brief overview of some introduction of the Ohio Environmental Council and discuss some of their work as it pertains to state level energy policy and programs. Look forward to a robust conversation with them. We'll be recording their remarks and posting them on our website and sharing them out publicly. And with that, Kylie, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself as I pull up your presentation.
I'm going to actually interject here for just a
sure.
second.
Go ahead.
This is Elizabeth Rojas, Cincinnati 2030 District Director. It is exciting to see some new faces in the room. And as such, I would love it if you could please put your name, and if you are with an organization, if you could also add that. That's kind of like your, your name tag for the group. So that'll help everybody understand sort of who's in the room and, a little bit about what all the folks that come to the table here. So thank you very much for being here, and I welcome Kylie.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you so much to you and Tom for having Nolan and I here today. It's really nice to see several familiar faces, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kylie Johnson, and I've been working in the environmental education community here in Cincinnati for the past 10 years now. First with the National Nonprofit Alliance for Climate Education, and the last 7 years I managed the Green Learning Station facility at the Civic Garden Center. I was very pleased to join OEC back in May of last year, feeling very called to environmental advocacy with the urgency of our climate crisis currently, and the desire to get our local elected leaders on board. So excited to share a little bit more about OEC. If you want to go to the next slide, Tom. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of our organization and our work here in Southwest Ohio, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Nolan. He'll be able to introduce himself more and then really talk about the bulk of our presentation today, which is about the energy program and different Statehouse tracking that we're doing currently. Next slide. So if you're not familiar with the Ohio Environmental Council, or OEC, our mission is to secure healthy air, land, water, and democracy for all who call Ohio home. And we're considered the state's most effective environmental advocate, and we've led many of the major environmental policy wins across the state over the last 52 years. Next slide. So our approach is, as environmental advocates, we develop science-based pragmatic solutions to address our state's environmental issues, and we're working daily to protect the quality of life for families and communities that live in Ohio. We have our main office in Columbus, close to Ohio State University, and we have a strong presence at the Statehouse with our policy experts like Nolan there, actively engaging our lawmakers in both parties and all of our different core program areas that you see listed on this slide. Next slide. So we have a family of organizations. We have a 501c3, a 501c4, a PAC, and a super PAC. So our 501c3, our nonprofit, that's the Ohio Environmental Council, our 52-year-old parent organization. And then in addition to that, 6 years ago, we created the OEC Action Fund, which is our 501c4 political lobbying arm. And with our 501c4, we're able to take political action by creating and enforcing environmental laws, holding our lawmakers accountable, and electing the right leaders in the first place who are going to make environmental protections a priority. And with our OEC Action Fund, we also provide candidate endorsements. So this last local election cycle was our first time really engaging deeply in local elections, including here in Cincinnati as well. In addition to those candidate endorsements, we also get involved with endorsing park levies. Locally, we endorse the Great Parks of Hamilton County levy that fortunately just passed. And with all of our endorsements, we have a very stringent interviewing process to make sure that we're making the best decisions with all of those. If you visit our website, the oecactionfund.org, you can see all these resources, sign up for action alerts, and you can also see that every year we post an Ohio General Assembly scorecard. And this scorecard is reflecting the administration's and the state lawmakers' actions on different key environmental decisions and legislation. So it's a really helpful tool to stay informed. Next slide. So how we work with our family of organization, that gives us a lot of different tools in our toolbox to operate in unique and diverse ways and on many different levels. So we're first with advocacy, we're at the table with decision makers at all levels to educate and advocate for environmental protections. We also have a fantastic communications team that mobilizes Ohioans across the state on a broad set of campaigns and using a creative communication tactics for those. We also have a law center, and that allows us to hold our lawmakers accountable, and we get involved in litigation when our environment, public health, or justice are at risk. With our democracy work, we've been deeply involved in the redistricting process, and most recently last month, our Law Center filed an amicus brief at the Ohio Supreme Court regarding this congressional redistricting. And I really appreciate as an environmental organization that we're involved in this democracy work, because we can't have a healthy environment without having a healthy democracy as well. And then finally, we're also building relationships and coalitions to have a bigger collective impact in this work. And so we have our field advocates in 5 regions across the state, also known as our regional directors, such as myself, that are focused on our organizing. Next slide. So to tell you a little bit more about our statewide field advocacy team made up of our regional directors, we are located in 4 different quadrants of the state, but we have an additional regional director in Cleveland as well, because there's a lot of work going on in that region of the state. So this team was formed about 6 years ago, around the time our OEC Action Fund was formed, and it was really meant to build and deepen our regional capacity, focusing in on local community action, because we really believe that we can make the most progress on climate change at the local level, where our leaders tend to be less partisan and more prone to listening to their constituents who want more sustainable, livable communities. And it's great because we can also have wins and successes at the local level, even when we have poor national and state leadership. And different cities across the state different communities have been distinguishing themselves as environmental champions like Cincinnati. So it's really exciting to be a part of this work. And as far as our state team and how we operate, we're working statewide, mostly to ensure that the environmental movement is equitable and accessible to all, and ensure that those voices that have historically been excluded from the movement are heard, especially those frontline communities, low-income communities, communities of color who are most impacted by climate change. Our field team also supports policy and advocacy objectives at the local level, and we're directly lobbying our elected officials when we need, and that's why it's really helpful to have our 501c4, our political action arm, to allow that lobbying. Next slide. And just to give you a little taste of my work here in the Southwest region, I'm providing boots on the ground support for our region, focusing in again on those frontline communities. We're so grateful to have amazing coalition partners like Green Umbrella in this work. And we've partnered with Green Umbrella in a number of different ways already, like you can see on this slide. We helped support the candidate education night last year and supporting candidate forums that happened in the fall as well, with some of our policy communication and field expertise as well. Also partnering with Green Umbrella last summer, we co-hosted a community map making event to support the redistricting process. And I'm going to be working closely with Savannah Sullivan, Green Umbrella's climate policy lead. Our work is really complementary to one another. So we're excited about the opportunities that we have there, and helping to support the regional climate collaborative that Savannah and Green Umbrella is creating currently. Another partner to mention as well is Groundwork Ohio River Valley. They are working on a wonderful program called Climate Safe Neighborhoods, again, focusing on those communities who are most impacted by climate change. And so I'm going to be supporting their goals to ensure that equity and inclusion is incorporated into the Green Cincinnati plan moving forward. And the way that I'm going to be doing that, and the way that I have been doing that over the past 7 months, is by developing champions of our environmental champions of our local elected leaders, and also building networks that can call upon those leaders to make environmental protections a priority. And it's a really exciting time right now in Cincinnati with the outcome of the election. We have a very pro-environmental city council and a bold leader with Mayor Puraval as well. So with our OEC Action Fund, I mentioned we endorsed candidates. We endorsed Mayor Puraval in this last election, and also 7 of the 9 of our current city council members. So we feel very excited about what is going to be able to be accomplished related to the environment with their leadership. And related to city council, next week is the first committee meeting for the new Climate, Environment, and Infrastructure Committee, which is the first of its kind in Cincinnati. And our national affiliate, League of Conservation Voters, also believes it's the first of its kind in the country. So it's really exciting to see what's going to happen with that group moving forward in that committee. And I'll be attending those meetings and also reporting back to share out with partners so everyone can stay in the network and know what's going on and take action when it's needed. And then finally, another key aspect of my role is connecting the region to what's happening at the Statehouse and what could potentially affect our region that's happening at the state level. So bringing in our policy experts like Nolan today to talk about current and pending legislation. Additionally, I'm going to be hosting with our policy experts twice a year legislative briefings that are open to the public to learn about legislation related to all of our different program areas that we're working on. And finally, with that, we're working on creating a Statehouse legislation tracking tool that we hope we'll have ready to go in March that we can share out. So it's a way that we can give quarterly updates to our members and concerned citizens and partners about what's going on at the state level, and if there is anything that they can help support. And I have one more slide here before I pass it to Nolan. I just wanted to share a few resources if you want to stay connected. I hope you'll sign up for my Southwest Ohio regional newsletter sent out every other month with updates. I'm also happy to share any events or news from partners that you would like to be included to our network. You can email me for that. Also, our OEC Action Fund, please check out that website and you can sign up for action alerts on there as well. The last resource to mention is to the right here, you can see a picture of our advocacy toolkit. You can access that from our website, a digital version. I also have plenty of hard copies. I'm happy to drop off any of those to you as well if they're of use. So I'm going to pause for a brief moment to see if there are any questions about OEC or our work in Southwest Ohio before I pass it to Nolan. Okay, well, thank you. Nolan, I'll pass it over to you.
Great, thanks, Kylie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nolan Rutschilling. I use he, him pronouns. I'm really excited to be here today. My job title is Interim Managing Director of Energy Policy for the Ohio Environmental Council. And that's my job is exactly what it sounds like. I lead the organization around policy and advocacy tied to anything in the energy space at the statewide level, and then work with our regional directors like Kylie to help support local leaders on the county, city, municipal level. Little background on me. I am, as Tom said, from the West Side. I'm from Colerain, and I'm really, really excited to be here with you today. So I want to thank you all for having me. I think you all have a lot of really exciting opportunity at the local level with your new leaders and your new committees and task forces, and it's very exciting. But today, I'm hoping to talk a little bit more high level about the Statehouse and what's going on here in Columbus, where I'm located now. I'm focusing on a few components here that I think will be particularly of interest to you, but I want to say I've got this list here. I'm going to go through it, give you some brief background. Please feel free to chime in the chat or to unmute yourself and chime in. I will try to keep an eye on both, but if Tom, Kylie, if someone asks a question, I don't see it, feel free to let me know. So there are two main ways we advocate at the state level on energy policy. There is the Statehouse, in which we work with the House, the Senate, and the governor's office to be advocates for clean energy that creates clean energy policies that create opportunities for emissions reduction and equitable job development for all Ohioans. And then we are also active at the Public Utilities Commission, and that's what our first bullet point is around. At the Public Utilities Commission, that's the main regulatory body tied to our local utilities and energy utilities across the state. So if, for example, a utility like Duke Energy wants to add a rider onto any of your bills to collect funding for modernizing their grid, that means updating their infrastructure, changing meters around, rerouting all kinds of lines, all kinds of elements, they have to write a proposal. They have to make their financial and community case at the Public Utilities Commission. So they file a case at the Public Utilities Commission, and parties, anyone from business interests to environmentalists like the OEC to hospitals to local governments can review those cases, look over those plans, and provide feedback and advocate on behalf of their interests at the Public Utilities Commission. So in the case of Duke's grid modernization plan, this is a plan that was filed, I believe, in late 2019 that included a lot of basic grid that would increase folks' bills to some degree, but included a lot of potential programs like updating power lines, updating transformers, adding what we call smart meters and intelligent technologies across the grid to have a more responsive grid and reduce outages. The proposal also included a number of elements around EV infrastructure. And like I said, that was back in 2019 with COVID and some controversies and changes at the PUCO. That case has slowly been moving along. All the parties I mentioned, the manufacturers, the businesses, the hospitals, have been kind of going back and forth, giving feedback on what they think is reasonable and what they think is not reasonable. The utility has the opportunity to respond. And then ideally, the utility and the majority of those parties reach a settlement where they all negotiate and come together to make a recommendation to the commissioners, who will give feedback and approve or move the grid modernization plan forward. We are in that settlement stage at the Duke Grid Mod case, and I can tell you it's looking like something will move forward. What exactly those details are, it remains to be seen, but I believe that Duke Grid Modernization rider will include potential rebates for electric vehicle charging at both public and private entities. I have not seen the final numbers or format or structure of those electric vehicle charging rebates, but I think that's something you'll want to keep your eye on once this plan is approved and starts being implemented. Once that happens, Duke will actually work to create a communications plan and a framework for you all to become aware of the different opportunities around electric vehicle charging. But that could be a really great opportunity for those of you who are looking to expand or increase your charging infrastructure at your facilities. There also is a potential pilot program for rebates for connected chargers that allow vehicle to grid connectivity during offload times. So what that means is if you have a truck, a school bus, a car in your fleet or at home that has the right capabilities and is an electric vehicle, theoretically Duke could tap into your battery during certain times and draw that power back onto the grid to reduce load and kind of give them some support, so they're not you're avoiding blackouts, you're avoiding excess generation. It provides some grid stability throughout the day. And that concept is called vehicle to grid. That seems like that pilot may actually move forward. We're still waiting to hear a little more on that, but that could be a really interesting, innovative program here in Duke territory. But overall, I would just say the PUCO is certainly not something you hear as much about compared to what you all probably hear about at the Statehouse level or your local city halls. But it is a really, really great mechanism and regulatory body to advocate on behalf of your interests. So I would recommend you all continue to OEC does regularly post updates and makes information available on our newsletter about PUCO cases. And at the end of this presentation, you'll find my email and you can always reach out to me around those. But I recommend you all track relevant cases at the PUCO and consider getting involved or pushing your local governments to get involved, because there are a lot of benefits for everyone for being represented during these cases. So that's the regulatory side. Let's move to the legislative side. First off, I imagine some of you are familiar with the House Bill 6 scandal. So that was energy legislation back in 2019 that dismantled the utility energy efficiency programs. It's effectively dismantled the requirement for utilities to procure a certain amount of renewable energy for their generation, and added subsidies for 2 nuclear plants in northeastern Ohio, and added subsidies for coal plants, one in Ohio and one in Indiana, along with a lot of other very utility-friendly tweaks. It was a very controversial legislation at the time. It passed barely with support from both parties. And it was called, at the time, the worst energy legislation of the 21st century. Ever since that passed in 2019, since it passed, it has been revealed that that legislation was part of an enormous bribery scheme that the former Speaker of the House, Larry Householder, was leading and receiving funding from First Energy Solutions, or First Energy up in Cleveland. They're the utility up there. They effectively led an enormous multi-year scheme that is now under federal investigation. They've reached some settlement agreements with the feds, and the Speaker of the House is currently under various corruption and bribery charges, and of course has been kicked out of the House. So what I'm about to talk to you all about today is the fallout of that enormous scandal that really shook the State House to its core and the governor's office to its core, and really has decimated our energy policy here in the state. There have been a number of efforts to rectify that. First, there are no nuclear subsidies on our bills. Those have been eliminated. What has not been rectified is the elimination of the energy efficiency rebates. I imagine a lot of you, those of you who were in the facility space or the sustainability space, if you were around before 2019, probably took advantage of some of the energy efficiency rebates Duke offered. You know, they were all kinds of prescriptive and direct rebates you could get for anything from light bulbs to chillers to anything else. Obviously, those are no longer around, but there is movement at the State House to introduce what we're calling voluntary energy efficiency programs. What that means is House Bill 389 is what I'm referring to. House Bill 389 would create voluntary energy efficiency programs that the utilities could choose to offer. So what that would look like is if a Duke Energy chooses to offer rebates, they could be made available for a small fee on everyone's bill, about $1.50 maximum a month, and some scaled down versions of the former rebates would become available for residents and small business customers. If they wanted to, they could also create opt-in energy efficiency rebates for larger customers, but larger customers would not be automatically included in any of these energy efficiency plans, and as such a rider would not be put on your bill if you're a mercantile user, if you use 400,000 kWhs a year or more. So this legislation is not perfect. It's a start at recreating energy efficiency rebates for businesses and residents so we can reduce our consumption here in the state, reduce this pollution, and allows folks to see some real return on investment for investing in energy efficiency. The bill has been supported by environmental groups, business groups, and the utilities to some degree. So there's quite a lot of momentum around House Bill 389 and creating what we're calling energy waste reduction programs. That's just another word for energy efficiency. The bill did stall at the end of the year, but we're pretty confident there's going to be a good push to get those energy efficiency programs going again in 2022, based on what we've heard from Republican leadership. So that's some real positive momentum there to get those rebates going. As I said, it's not perfect. A lot of you larger facilities and users may not be able to take advantage of all of those rebates, but it does create the mechanism in the future if we push the utilities and demonstrate that these are effective programs for the utilities to create rebates for larger users. So it's the first step in a larger process of making sure you all can take advantage of energy efficiency rebates and see a good return on investment. Another legislation I want to briefly touch on is the OVEC subsidies. These are subsidies that go to 2 coal plants owned by 3 of the 4 utilities in Ohio. One of the coal plants is in Cheshire, Ohio, in Eastern Ohio, and one is in Madison, Indiana, not even in Ohio. So right now on all of our bills, we are paying a subsidy to bail out those OVEC coal plants. These are Cold War era, really heavy polluting coal plants that have been grandfathered in a lot of clean air legislation and are now being investigated for their pollution controls and just how clean they are. Duke AEP and AES, and formerly DP&L, all have a large ownership stake in these plants, and as such have lobbied to keep that subsidy on the books. So a number of legislators in both the House and the Senate have introduced bills that would remove those subsidies off of our electric bills. But that momentum stalled last year with a few hearings in which the utilities I mentioned all advocated that they needed those subsidies to keep the coal plants open. That's going to be very, very relevant in 2022 and moving forward. OEC is going to be very involved in working to remove that subsidy. We think, not just the fact, let's move past the fact that they're extremely polluting, dirty coal plants. They're uneconomical, and we do not, from an environmental justice and equity lens, we don't support adding riders on folks' bills to bail out corporations. And that's what this is. We're going to be working really hard to advocate on keeping momentum going to get rid of those OVEC subsidies. Right now, there are a number of audits going on of those plants at the PUCO. That's a result of all the controversy around House Bill 6 as well. So House Bill 6 is the reason those coal plant subsidies are on your bill. So it's a direct result of all the other corruption that's happening at the Statehouse. There's going to be a lot of headlines and a lot of investigations. Today, the governor, actually kind of breaking news, the governor came out and said he doesn't support at least the subsidies for the coal plant in Indiana, and really isn't sure he agrees with subsidies for coal plants at all. So we're really going to work to build upon that momentum, lower folks' bills, and reduce emissions here in Ohio. So those are some bills that deal with our messy past at the Statehouse. I am excited to talk about some more positive things at the end of our time here. And again, ask questions as we go, please. One piece of legislation that the OEC and the OEC Action Fund are really, really excited about is the Energy Jobs and Justice Act. And this is a bill that is a reaction to all the controversy, the corruption, the utility influence at the state level that I've been talking about. It takes that experience and looks forward. It's very forward-thinking legislation that is designed to introduce a lot of new concepts around decarbonization, around equity, and around oversight and accountability at the state level. So this is a bill that was introduced last fall by 2 Democrats. I'll get into the components in a little bit, but to be very candid with you, we're not sure this will pass this General Assembly, but the goal here is to introduce concepts that will could make their way in other legislation, or could really change the conversation and inform future policy making. So this is excellent legislation, very forward thinking. But it's going to impact the entire conversation around energy policy. It's not just about moving this bill forward. So as I said, this Energy Jobs and Justice Act is focused on decarbonization. It creates a carbon reduction plan for retail electric providers. It requires a number of both regulated and unregulated utilities to have plans for immediate and dramatic reduction of their carbon emissions in their generation operations. It creates zero carbon credits for various businesses and organizations that do reduce their emissions. It would create funding mechanisms to spur sustainability and pollution reduction. And it levels the playing field for renewables. The Energy Jobs and Justice Act does. It eliminates a lot of regulatory barriers for solar and wind development, and helps eliminate some of the subsidies that natural gas and coal plants still receive in Ohio. So it's focused on decarbonization through those mechanisms. It's also focused on accountability. I mentioned a lot of the utility influence at the state level. This legislation introduces a greater opportunity for the Public Utilities Commission to conduct audits and investigations into utilities suspected of wrongdoing. It gives them greater authority. For example, if a utility is found to be overcharging, if Duke is overcharging its commercial customers through a rate mechanism and they were recovering too much money, the PUCO can actually force them to repay the customers. Right now, that's not the case. It's really pretty shocking, but in a lot of cases, even if a utility directly overcharges due to an audit or a Supreme Court review, it reveals they've been charging too much. Those utilities are often not required, according to Ohio law right now, to pay back customers. They may have to donate it or put it in a community fund, but it doesn't go back to consumers and to consumers and customers. So we want to give the PUCO greater authority there. We also reformed the way the PUCO is appointed. Right now, the commissioners are selected by a nominating council that the governor appoints, and the governor has final say along with the legislature over the various commissioners. We'd like to ensure that there are a lot more stringent regulations to ensure that the folks being appointed are not direct or former employees of the utilities or currently being paid by the utilities. That's a reaction to Sam Randazzo, who was the former chair of the Public Utilities Commission from 2019 through some of 2020. He was appointed by Governor DeWine despite environmentalists and consumer advocates' concerns. And it turned out he got a $2 million payment from First Energy right before he started as the chair of the Public Utilities Commission. And as a result, we're all looking at a number of rulings that seem to be very favorable to First Energy's bottom line. So in terms of accountability, we're very focused on ensuring that everyone is represented at the Public Utilities Commission, not just utilities. And finally, equity and justice. We're really focused on environmental justice and equity through this legislation. It calls for the creation of an Office of Energy Justice in Ohio. It would, one, ensure that PUCO decisions are guided by the principles of energy justice, whether that, are communities of color, are marginalized communities represented, how are they financially, materially impacted, and how are they environmentally impacted. The office would require a lot of more investigation and accountability there. And then the Office of Energy Justice would also administer a lot of equitable business and workforce development programs. And the legislation would create quite a lot of incentives for different communities, both in BIPOC communities and in communities that might otherwise be left behind in the energy transition, maybe in Eastern Ohio, as we shift from coal and natural gas to renewables. There's quite a lot of incentives and funding to make sure those workers and companies are taken care of, and given opportunities for retraining or incentives on that line to kind of make sure they're not left behind.
Nolan, can I ask a question about that? Mm-hmm. And give you a chance to drink some water if you need to. So I was curious, you said that there would be potentially, should this bill pass, or at least some version of it in the future, components of it, that there would be funding mechanisms for particular communities. Is that those mechanisms primarily going to be funded through the elimination of certain subsidies, or is there any sort of more detail into how exactly that would work practically should this pass, in terms of how that type of program would be administered?
Yeah, I think a lot of it would come from elimination of subsidies. It also would most likely involve some kind of rider on folks' bills, but it would be very, very low with the focus on equity. It also would involve just straight reallocation of the Public Utilities Commission budget. So right now, the taxes all of us pay on our electric bills goes towards administration of the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. We'd take some of that money directly and apply it to equity. So we'd avoid charging folks too much. So a lot of, yeah. Tom, did you have another question?
No. Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
So that's a lot of concepts. There's a lot more that I didn't even have a chance to get to, but it's very exciting legislation. We're hoping that a lot of those elements, particularly around workforce development and equity, can be applied in other ways. For example, it's not on our list, and I don't have many details on it right now, but there's also a bill currently at the Statehouse focused on creating the opportunity for community solar. It's House Bill 450, and that legislation would create the opportunity for solar development on brownfields and in Appalachian communities to create solar arrays that folks could purchase directly from. So you wouldn't have to go through a third party, you could purchase directly from. That's the general concept of community solar. This legislation will hopefully drive conversations like that as well, and kind of ensure not just that renewable energy and clean energy generation is expanding in the state, but that it's done in a way that we all can benefit and not just a few companies. That's the real goal of this legislation. Finally, we come to the federal infrastructure bill, and this is the infrastructure bill, not the Build Back Better plan. I'm going to be very honest with you. We at the OEC and some of our partners are still wrapping our heads around the federal infrastructure bill that passed in 2021 under President Biden's administration, but it creates a lot of significant opportunities for all kinds of infrastructure improvements in our communities. Right now, there's a lot of rulemaking and budget decisions that still need to be made at the federal level, and then that legislation will go down to the state level, where various agencies will often have the opportunity to help set some boundaries on where some of this funding will flow. And we're going to work really hard to interpret that legislation, work with local stakeholders like you all and across the state, to make sure you all have the opportunity to take advantage of this really historic legislation. It creates opportunities for electric grid and power infrastructure upgrades. It has significant funding for electric vehicle infrastructure and charging stations, both public and private. It has all kinds of funding for passenger and freight rail and public transportation systems. It creates funding for broadband investments, public transit, as I said, environmental remediation, brownfields and polluted areas. And then it has a lot of funding for communities around water systems and infrastructure. And that's just at the very, very high level. I think there are also some elements around building efficiency and demand reduction that are really, really interesting in the infrastructure bill. And our job over the next few months is to really delve into what that actually means and help advise the governor and agencies on how that funding could be distributed. But for folks on this call, again, to that business or community focus, I think they're just from a sustainability and climate perspective, there's quite a lot of opportunity around electric vehicle charging and efficiency, building efficiency measures. So we'll be sure to keep you all in the loop there, along with the much needed upgrades to our electric grid and infrastructure, because I'm sure you all don't need me to tell you how dire the situation is there. We want to ensure everyone has reliable and affordable power. So I know that was a ton of information, and I want to thank you all for being so patient as I ran through there. But if folks have questions, you can go ahead and ask now or follow up. We'll have our emails available as well. Kylie and I will. But does anyone have any thoughts or questions?
Don't hold back, folks. This is your opportunity.
Hey, Nolan, I have a question. This is Matt Kolbinski. I'm with Pro Lighting and Solar. I'm a renewable energy consultant based in Cincinnati. As far as the federal infrastructure bill, do you know if there are any provisions to reinstate the EPACT tax credit for energy efficiencies for building envelopes?
I'm pulling up my list of provisions right now. I know there are a number of efforts around grants and energy efficiency standards, but I'm not sure exactly. Can you state the name of the building
Yes.
envelope program?
It's EPACT, EPACT, and it was a tax credit that was based on the square footage of your facility and the offset to the building envelope. Like for me, I'm a union electrician, so the lighting aspect is what I normally looked at. It was a tax credit, and I think it was like 60 cents per square foot if you were under certain ash rate provisions.
Right.
So that tax credit expired years back, but it's something that would be really helpful. I had heard that it was getting reinstated, but I have not seen that. And it's something, now that there aren't any incentives for lighting retrofits, that's really had a negative impact on the amount of lighting retrofits that we've done in the last year and a half since Duke killed the incentive program.
Right.
But the tax credit's pretty significant. So I'm not sure if you were aware of if that was reinstituted or not.
I'm not aware, but I'll look into it. I've got a number of resources here, and I'll drop my email in the chat, Matt. And if you shoot me an email, I can follow up, because I know there's a number of grants and incentives, and it talks about building codes. I would imagine something similar to what you described, or something you can take advantage of, is in there, but I'm not aware of that, if that particular program is still going or would be reinstated.
Okay.
And so I'll follow up with you on that.
Okay.
And then on the Contemporary Arts Center, I see funding for energy efficiency equipment. That is potentially something that would be available in just at that high level. The program allocates almost over $500 million for energy efficiency conservation, grants. It would be a block program, and in terms of the Contemporary Arts Center or others being able to take advantage of it, that's still to be determined based on some federal rulemaking and then how the state wants to distribute that funding. But I imagine they will spread that out across a number of different categories in customer classes. So while at the state level, we're not seeing a lot of incentives, as Matt said, Duke doesn't have those rebates. And even if they do reinstate rebates based on the legislation, a lot of large customers couldn't take advantage. So what we're hoping is this infrastructure creates a one-time grant and incentive program for you all to take advantage still. So I think generally for equipment, the opportunity is going to be there, but in terms of what's eligible, that still has to be determined.
Great. Does anybody else have if anybody else has any other questions, by all means, you can certainly send them to Daniel and I, or directly to Kylie and Nolan. I do want to give Elizabeth a chance to make a quick announcement that she'd like to share with the group. But yeah, are there any other last minute questions before we move to that?
Well, thank you all. That was a great presentation, both Kylie and Nolan. We appreciate you all taking the time to share with us what's happening at the local, state, and federal level. So I do want to announce that our local IBEW 212 is now sponsoring us at a marquee level. We are very excited about that sponsorship. And I wanted to see if somebody, Matt or Chad, want to have any words with our group, since this ties so well into a lot of the work that you all do.
Hey, everybody. I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing. All this doesn't get done without your work, and we're proud to sponsor this work and keep up the good work, because the things that you're doing here, I really appreciate what Kylie and Nolan have put together. And the activities that they're doing, that seems like a great effort to support as well. So keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic.
I'd like to chime in as well. And Chad, I want to thank you and the electrical workers for your continued support. It's been really helpful to spread the message or spread the word about sustainability here in Southern Ohio. And we really appreciate your efforts. We're also rolling out a solar program called Solar Now, and the electrical workers are going to be giving some incentives for that program as well, to help offset the initial costs of people installing solar in the Cincinnati area. So I want to thank you, Chad and Rick Fisher, the business manager of IBEW Local 212, for your continued support. And myself as a professional partner, PAF Electric and Solar, Riverside Electric, ESI Electric, we are all benefiting from your leadership and from your support. So thank you again, and I look forward to 2022 being a great year, an excellent year as far as solar and for EV charging and any energy efficiency measures that we can push forward as well would be great. Kylie and Nolan, I want to thank you guys as well for doing what you do. We desperately need this type of legislation and leadership from a state level. It's been a long time coming. I feel like we've kind of been punished here in the state of Ohio from a legislative standpoint with all the backdoor deals that have gone on in the past. It's nice that we can try to look at some legislation that'll shed some light and some transparency and make things a little bit better for the taxpayers in the state of Ohio. So thanks again, Tom Schultz and Elizabeth. Thank you as well.
It is our pleasure. We are very, very grateful for your support. Thank you all. I think that's time, and I just want to say thank you to everyone that joined today, and we look forward to seeing you at some of the next meetings. Tom will be in touch. Take care.